Welcome to this episode of They Learn, You Win, the podcast from Skooks. I'm your host, David Wentworth, and my guest today is Katie Tonda. She's the Senior Director of Talent and Development at Goosehead Insurance. She's been a learning leader for over 20 years, and she's shaped learning at places like Walmart, Samsung, Verizon Wireless. And in each of her roles, Kate has always focused on an organizational transformation, as well as blending strategy and practical execution. And that's why I thought Kate would be the perfect person to walk us through what it takes to organize the L&D function as part of the business without losing the connection to people that makes it effective. So this is another great discussion that touches on how to make an impact and how to measure it. All right, Katie, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm really looking forward to this because, we're always trying to find out how organizations are being successful with learning, with growth, with career development in unique environments. And I think your organization, Goosehead Insurance, has a unique environment in that very franchise model, correct?
Yes.
And so you've got a very dispersed, diverse community of people that you're trying to reach and trying to connect with. So I always love those environments because you take all of the things that learning and development people have to deal with on a daily basis and then add a whole other layer of challenges on top of it. So so as we get into like sort of what life is like there, why don't you explain to me a little bit about that environment, about your role, and just so we know what we're talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. So as you mentioned, I'm with Goosehead Insurance. I have just hit my 6-month anniversary with them in the last couple of weeks, and I'm leading their talent and development organization, and really in a place where we're standing that up for the organization. So while they've been a company for a while, they're still relatively young, right, compared to like maybe more well-established organizations. But thankfully, they've seen the opportunity and the need to invest in talent and in learning solutions. And so I was brought in and am very excited to be able to help them as they continue to look to grow and scale into the future.
And so in that, right, in that environment, we're talking a lot about, insurance agents who are technically independent, correct? And so while they don't work directly for Goosehead, right, they're selling your products, selling your services out there in the space, correct?
Yeah, yes. So I think there's a couple things that are unique that are going on. So like, you're absolutely right. So there is a model, right, in terms of like the franchise arm, which is part of the sales teams. But then we also do have like corporate sales teams. And then also the largest part of the organization in terms of population is also their service organization. And then you add in, of course, all of like the support teams and areas of domain like HR, legal, finance that are also make up that ecosystem.
Gotcha.
So combination.
And so that's where this focus on talent development, this shift is aimed at, right? I mean, trying to grow there. So, as you come into this environment, what's it like to sort of come in ground floor to build something? Because I think a lot of L&D professionals would be jealous of that, even though I'm sure it's a lot, right? All of a sudden, the past 6 months has probably been pretty intense. But I think we hear a lot that companies would like to do certain things, but the professionals are coming in midstream, or the way things have been done for a decade or more, and it's really hard to get any momentum. So have you found that there's just sort of freedom in this ability to come in at that same time?
Yeah, so much freedom. So I would say I would consider myself always someone who does better at creating than like pushing buttons and pulling levers. So that really fills my cup. So that was one of the things that immediately appealed to me, was this blank canvas to be able to like build things on. The benefit of that, especially as a learning and development professional, is that it's not very often that you get to, kind of create things in your own image, so to speak, right? A lot of times you are, I would say, handcuffed potentially by preconceived notions or by the way things used to be or by previous leaders. And so it has been really exciting to come in, not only at this time, but also to come in and have the ability to really think from the ground up, what should talent and learning look like for the organization? And I think you and I have talked about this a little bit, and this isn't uncommon in organizations, regardless of where they are in their maturity. But a lot of times training isn't defined in organizations in terms of maybe the deliverables or the solutions or the type of support. And that was true when I originally came into Goosehead as well, right? Training was based more on the length of time that the individual, like the learner, had been in the business, instead of based on like the solutions and value that talent and learning as as a discipline can bring to the organization. So that was one of the first things that I got to do, was really help redefine what is talent and learning and what are the deliverables, the support, the value that it can bring to the business, and start to stand up a organization that would do that, compared to being more operational or just like an extension or an early extension of running the business.
Yeah, I mean, I think you've sort of encapsulated in it's that you're moving the organization from training to
Mm-hmm.
learning. I think there's often, um, you know, those words are sometimes used interchangeably,
Mm-hmm.
and I think there really is a difference. Not that there is not a place for training in an organization, but if that's solely what we're focused on is training, then what you're focused on is getting as many people into it and through
Yep.
it as possible. And
Yeah.
can they, answer the questions at the end? And now let's move on. And a lot of companies are just end up in that mode because daily life, putting out fires, getting things done. And so I think that is a big shift to get from a training mindset to not only a learning mindset, which then now there's another thing that's separate, growth and development, which I think I talk about this a lot on the podcast and with other places, but we say learning and development so much, L&D, and that the L&D team, that they get squished into this one thing, and they're not, right? Learning
Right.
isn't necessarily development. And
Yeah.
so when you're building this, when you're starting to look at this, what are some of the foundational things that you think, okay, this is where we need to start. These are the things we need to think about.
Yeah. So one of the first things that I did is I really wanted to ground the other people functions. So we are, again, just based off of like tremendous growth, very fast. Like the other people functions we're spread out, right? So like my talent acquisition partner, my HR partner, like we don't sit underneath the same umbrella, at least not today. I think, again, as the organization matures, we'll see that change. But that can pose some challenges, right? In terms of like having a shared lexicon about how we talk about all of the people work. So one of the first things I did is really grounded the organization in a shared concept related to the employee life cycle, and stood that up so that we could start to make sure that we talked about employee experience with consistent, like there's these 8 stages, there's, activities that happen. I like to say there's defining moments of engagement that happens in every single one of those. And so that was really a foundational piece for us so that we could start to, cross-functionally collaborate and then look at, like, again, the employee doesn't experience your organization just in a tract or just in their development stages. They have, just like any relationship, it's from beginning to end. So that was really, really important. And then the other thing that we immediately wanted to lean into was obviously our frontline populations are the largest populations, but I believe that leadership pull-through is the number one climate factor for success. So for any intervention, whether that's training, whether that's a change initiative, whether it's transformation efforts. And so we immediately started to lean into defining what leadership competencies should be and where, prioritize where we needed to start so that we could equip and enable leaders to be successful. So as we go from training to learning and then into development, we have a very highly capable, well-trained, knowledgeable, and very skilled leadership element as well. So we spent Q4 really digging into that.
So you've opened up several doors just then that I want to go walk through. I want to get into the leadership development piece. I'm going to put that on hold for 1 second because we just talked about something that I've been very much on my mind the past few weeks, actually, is people functions, HR, learning, right? And how does that work? And I literally just had a conversation yesterday with somebody about this. And so I'd be interested to see if you and I either agree, disagree, or if there's like some sort of third thing, because I feel like for a long time, learning has been trying to actually extricate itself from the HR world, right?
Yeah.
And you used to hear about the war for talent, and it was like we're trying to get people, and that was an external thing, right? Trying to get the right people. But I've always felt the war for talent is an internal thing, where learning and HR have been fighting for people. So my sort of take on it is that the more that learning can extricate itself from HR, the better, right? The more that learning can define itself as a unique driver of things in the business, the better. But I'm just listening to you, and you're like talking about how well you kind of want that though because of the people aspect of it, right? Obviously, and so the things that touch on what makes us us at work, I think that there is that connection. You don't want to sever that completely. So, what's your take on that? That sort of that push pull between learning wanting to be this thing that we are integral to the business, we drive change, versus we have to remain rooted in people.
Yeah. So I think it's one of those things where we can't have either or. It has to be and. And so this is where that I often get asked, like, where and how should like learning be structured within the organization? And I've sat in organizations that have both, like where learning is centralized underneath an HR, like larger people arm. I've also been in organizations where it's underneath like the various functional teams, right? Like departments. And so I think the best model is a combination of those things. So I think that a centralized organization under a people umbrella is important because it does give you continuity in terms of how you look at the employee experience. And I'm a big believer that whether it's learning or any HR function, really like we serve those who serve your client, right? Or your end customer. And so having that continuity for the employee journey, right? We talk about like client journeys for the employee journey, I think is really important. But the best model also includes some kind of like dedicated, sacred, let's say, support that is dotted line, or at least dedicated to supporting those functional and unique needs that the departments have. And I think that when you talk about like learning, trying to extricate itself, it really boils down to wanting to ensure that you're connected to business results. And unfortunately, in some cases, sometimes, maybe too frequently, as learning or other HR functions have, if they are not sitting within the business or connected to the departments that they serve results, they serve their own objectives.
Right.
Right. And so also think it's important, even in a centralized model, that whatever is set for goals for those organizations, again, that serve the departments, that serve the end user, there has to be some skin in the game. And having your success connected to the department success that you drive, and really making sure that, again, everything you do, people are always like, again, training, but like training is just like any other business investment. It's not free 99. Like there's a cost, but I think sometimes that gets lost if you're separate and not having to ensure that what you're doing is adding value to KPIs and to, a business number, just like any other department.
Yeah, I've seen this, that it's, I think some L&D teams or functions actually enjoy the ambiguity because they can put out this, we're a part of the business, we're going to drive change and results, we want to connect with stakeholders, we want a seat at the table. And then it's like, okay, you got the seat, now tell me what you're doing, let's see the impact, what's actually happening. Like, oh, we're just an HR function, we can show you the completions and the compliance. And it's like you can't have both, right? You can't drive actual impact without being able to say, here's what we did. And I think it's hard to do, obviously. So
when I'm like, I've always told my team, I'm like, I need a seat at the table. What I'm more interested in is a voice at the table and not being like a passive participant at that table. And really, again, the only way for L&D to do that is to demonstrate and isolate how what you do is helping achieve business results. Otherwise, a variety of things happen. Like it becomes a compliance-based activity where it's like check the box, which then makes us dispensable. Hard decisions have to be made. Otherwise, I think too that there ends up being a perception from sales teams, service teams, that nothing gets done. It moves too slow. And so that's kind of the risk as well when you sit outside of the functional area to become very accustomed to a different pace, let's say, that doesn't necessarily like land well with your stakeholders and your internal clients.
Yeah. In, that model, we talk about, trying to make sure that we keep very people focused and, developing and growing. But in your particular environment, again, you've got a lot of learning audiences that don't work for you, right? They're the agents. And so like, is there a slight disconnect? Do you approach them differently? Because, for lack of a better, they're not your people, right? I mean, yeah, I know they are, but at the end of the day, they're not. And so, do you have to do things differently for that audience?
Yeah, so I think we have a couple like a lot of businesses, whether it's again like through franchising or in our service space, we have, third parties that also are not like, let's say, like Goosehead badged individuals. And so I think that in those situations, you obviously have to be very mindful of any co-employment or running into any like legal issues. But the approach that I've taken historically as well as here is that it's kind of like Field of Dreams. Like if you build it, they will come. And so through those partnerships and again, like relationships, standing up of contracts, like really seeing like, again, where is there areas where we can produce value? Because at the end of the day, all of these spaces, again, whether it's in a contact center, whether it's in a franchise, serve the client, right? Those are like Goosehead clients. And so I think that there's a decent amount of leeway in that space, especially when it's like connected to like client experience, right? So I think that like client experience being at the center of all things ensures that, again, you're not just providing compliance-based training or process-based training, but can also make available things that elevate skill, elevate behavior, and again, also make available some leadership offerings
Yeah.
because, again, at the end of the day, we're all serving a client that to them, it's all Goosehead.
Right. I talk about this a lot with that the franchise model. At the end of that chain, whatever it is, the person that's either, the customer that's taking part in those services or going to that restaurant or whatever it is, they don't know and they don't care what the
Yeah.
franchise model is. They're
Yeah.
having this specific experience, so we have to make sure that that's correct.
Well, it's your brand. It's
Yeah.
right. It's not a different brand. Like you said, for the consumer, I know we talked about, they don't know if it's like a franchise McDonald's or if it's a
Doesn't matter.
corporate. Yeah. It's McDonald's.
Right.
Right. So I definitely think too that especially in that when you're dealing again with like 3PL or contract labor, there are things where you're not dictating, right? Whereas with internal, you have a lot more ability to drive like required completions and those kinds of things, which again just goes back to the point we're having about measuring your results and being able to show that there's value because again, you want to be where the deliverable or the product you're producing is in demand, right? And the best way to make that in demand is be able to show how those who do take advantage of it perform better.
What's your opinion on this? That in that type of environment, often the company looks at that kind of training for those external partners, whatever they are, as an operational thing, right? That's owned by operations or owned by sales. And so is there a right way to do it, or is it just dependent? Because it could be like, okay, it's owned by operations with input from learning, or should it be owned by learning with input from operations, or is it just sort of, whatever works best?
Yeah. So I think that like we're kind of in the messy middle of trying to figure this out right now. And the way that I've been discussing it is I think that the operations teams, again, whether it's the sales organization or the service organization, like where they play the biggest role is in things like best practices, right? And so the way I'd like to see it is that the talent and learning organization looks at everything through the lens of competencies and then is able to connect those competencies to consistent models, concepts, whether that's a sales model, a service model, a call flow, like those kinds of things. But that becomes like, again, the source of truth and the item that we always come back to, always land on. When you have that, the benefit is then you have consistent, again, nomenclature and like words really matter. That's like something I've learned with all the organizations that I worked at is so often we miss each other in communication because we think we're saying the same thing. It's a common word, but we're missing each other. Rose Fast wrote a really great book called The Chocolate Conversation on this, where we think we're all talking about chocolate, but there's lots of different kinds of chocolate. And so I think having it where talent and learning grounds us on sound competencies, models that support that, where we have partnership then with the operations team is in and how the tools, templates, and resources are made available to operationalize that. And then how do you tap in to your early adopters and your catalysts for change to then also arm individuals with best practices using that standardized model and supporting tools and resources. A lot of times, though, it goes backwards. It's the best practice feeds the tool or template, then that feeds what the model is, and then it's not connected to competencies at all.
Yeah, and you're spot on about, the language and the words, and that's one of the things that comes up for learning when, oh, we want to be, partner to the business, seat at the table, all that, and they're like, well, speak the language of the business, and it's like, well, yes, but don't just adopt this sort of business speak that doesn't have any connection to what you're doing, right? I mean,
Right.
like you say, yes, let's find a common language, but let's make sure we're actually saying the things that we're
Yeah.
trying to say, because too often you see the L&D leaders adopt this business speak, and it's like, okay, no one's actually talking about anything.
Right. Or if it seems like it's superficial, right? Like, and
Yeah.
that's where I always encourage my team, and some of the development we do is around financial acuity and like making sure that you understand, financial basics, but also how we make money, because
Yeah.
that like creates a more innate and deeper understanding, because nothing's worse either than when you have like someone in the people function or learning function who's like using words or trying to like make it make sense, but you can just tell that it's very superficial.
Hmm.
There's few ways to lose credibility quicker, and to use the language and have people realize that you don't actually know what you're talking about.
Precisely. And that's why those partnerships are good, like on an individual level, finding people in the business so you can have the conversations to find out what really matters and how
Yeah.
you should be talking about these, as opposed to just sort of independently trying to figure it out on your own and then bring it, to the business. So that then takes me to coming back around to when you started talking about the leadership thing, because you touched on something else that I'm very fascinated and interested in, is this shift in how leadership development is seen in the world. Because for a long time, leadership development, it was this unique, segregated thing that was for literal leaders, right? For executives and things. And it's very high touch. And you look at the way companies invest, and in my mind, they overinvest in leadership development. They spend a lot of money in that, not as much in the rest of the learning that they're doing, because they think to themselves, well, this is much higher stakes, bigger impact. It's the company's future. But then what we've seen is this shift of, it turns out the things that we're trying to develop in these leaders are really critical up and down and across the organization, right? So how do we start to do those things at scale? And the democratization of leadership development, I think, is happening a lot lately. And so it sounds like that's one of the things, as you came in and you're building this, that's something front of mind for you, is let's build leaders everywhere.
Yeah. So I think it's so interesting, because I think the other thing I see with leadership development is this assumption that if you're at the higher, like, or upper level echelon, let's say, right, that there's skills you already have, right, or development that already exists. And so one of the things I'm a big believer in is that, like, layers of leadership, they always think like the level above needs less, but really it like needs more. And that doesn't necessarily mean more, again, like formal training, but like more in terms of like access, exposure, maybe follow up, coaching elements that would like help. Because again, if you know how, you need to be able to show how. And if you can show how, then you earn the right to like lead and coach others. So that's, I think, been really interesting as well. And I've seen a lot of organizations who are like, oh, like, we're just going to give it to the frontline leaders, but like their layer, doesn't need it. But again, you're like biting off your nose to spite your face, because if leadership pull through is the number one climate factor, it's going to be an event. So like the big thing with any training, but especially leadership, is I think ensuring that you're thinking outside of just event-based training, and that everything you do is focused less on knowledge, even though you need to know before you can do. I mean, if all you needed was knowledge, everyone who read every New York Times bestseller would be the best leader in the world. Unfortunately, just reading about things doesn't, equip you with skill. So, in addition to being like less event or just like this formal learning moment focus, we've really been thinking a lot about those tools, templates, and resources that you can insert into the ecosystem that allow skill to happen, even if there isn't a formal learning that takes place. So that's been really important. And then I think the other item is like repetition. So we've been doing a lot of bursting and boosting on key models and concepts, because again, like just like any muscle, that's what like skill and behavior, is just like a muscle that you have to consistently exercise. So putting in place like all of the frameworks and all of the operational tools, templates, resources, performance success measures that enable you to change behavior to change results. And I think too often we just think again that it's like, we're going to send them to this training, or we're going to have them take this like module or this courseware. And it's like, that will only get you so far. And a lot of times it'll just be, again, an event that doesn't, turn into muscle memory.
So what are some of these things look like that aren't the event, or that are connected to the event, that are doing this stuff for you, this reinforcement, this revisit?
Yeah. So I'll give you an example. In Q4, we focused on managing performance because we also just had a new HRS with Workday made available. And so like really for the first time, we were able to align on what are the activities that take place in managing performance. So it would have been really easy for us to just, have this like 4-hour workshop, or, we did virtual, we had self-guided e-modules. But instead, the team also, we stood up as a set of leader toolkit items that would enable those different managing performance activities to take place. So, providing people with one-on-one templates, year-end conversation guides, scripts, like that all get like bundled into this leader toolkit. And then also ensuring that there's online performance support. So standing up, reference document, how to, like, ability to access, in the moment of apply. So, I mean, hopefully you're doing preparation before you have a year-end conversation. But if you are not, having the online resource and content available to refresh you on the what, the why, and then all of the tools, templates, and resources you have that enable you to operationalize that was really important to us with the stand-up of that. A lot of times it would have been just the training, and then you send them out and there's nothing for them to use or to go back to be able to like put the practices that you just shared with them or the behaviors into their day-to-day.
Right. And when we talk about these things all the time, and it just makes so much sense, and it sounds like common sense, but it's the actual doing of it that's challenging. Because of course, you can't give people the information that they need, the knowledge they need, and expect that that's then from that day forward, that skill, that knowledge exists, right? It's just because we're humans, you continually need to come back and check in and try again and relearn and remember. And just finding ways to do that. That's always been the challenge. It's like, well, I have a day job, right? I'm trying to do my job. And it's like, well, we have to change this mindset where the learning is that part of that job. If you want to do that job well, this is part of it. It isn't something separate. It is another tool in your toolbox to do your job.
Right. Well, and then I think that's where as well, one of the things that we did, and it was, again, very serendipitous in terms of timing, was because it was goal setting for the entire organization, also having where your goals include not just what. So historically, it's been just KPIs, but also having your performance success measures include how. So like having like the coaching element that we had just workshopped on also being part of your job expectations. So in terms of like a success measure includes ensuring that you're providing specific, timely, consistent feedback using the model that we had in the training to your team. Also, because things that are important to people are going to be on how their success is measured. And so if it is important to you, I think really evaluating, like, again, not just how do you operationalize it by making it available in your systems, but like, is it important enough where you're going to set a performance expectation against it?
And so obviously coaching is important to you. You're talking about training people for it. So we've seen that's another thing that companies who are having a lot of success from a learning perspective are incorporating more and more coaching into the broader spectrum of learning. So is that something that you're trying to do as well? Like, what's your current or maybe even future aspirational approach to coaching across the whole organization?
Yeah. So I think that I would love to start from the top down and like lean into something like executive coaching and eventually have that available. I think that is really important to have at the C-suite level. It's one of those things, again, where again, people might be like, oh, I'm here, but like, so I don't need that. I personally have participated with like life coaches, personal coaches, and can tell you it's invaluable. But one of the things we're doing for like frontline, and we'll be piloting this with the service organization related to coaching and building that muscle memory and ensuring that there's consistency with providing coaching, is we're looking at a technology solution called Amplify, which is kind of like a performance enhancement solution. So I think one of the other things for frontline teams that leaders, those frontline leaders really have to struggle with is there's just a lot of administration that maybe isn't recognized, right? In terms of like running their business, running their teams. And so it will allow us to like take multiple data sources and using AI, evaluate what someone's next best activity is. And that might be recognition, it might be follow-up, it might be coaching. And then also having it where there's the ability to like have coaching provided to the coach through using AI as well. Because not all coaching is created equal. And so I think implementing, especially for organizations, it doesn't have to be that solution, but a solution that ensures that the right next best activity is happening for the individual is really valuable. Removing the administration of people having to analyze and synthesize all of the data from all of the various sources, and then having it where you don't have to have a live resource. It doesn't have to be a trainer from my team or another leader that observes the coaching, because you can like literally leverage technology to be able to give the people who you want to be providing good coaching based on a rubric.
Yeah, I've been, for a while now talking through a lot of the different approaches to AI in the technologies that we use. And I've always tried to be okay, that's all well and good, like all the fantastical stuff that you're seeing in the news if you want to talk about, but let's talk about some practical applications. And coaching's been one of those places where I've said this is a real opportunity for companies, because coaching's hard to do because it's high touch, and typically one-on-one ultimately, right? And so what it takes to get there is really hard. And so it's hard to scale. So it's left to just a handful of executive coaching, which is, like you said, very important, but other people get left out of that experience. But the AI is doing just what you said. You have the ability to take all the different inputs and recognize a prime coaching opportunity, which isn't always readily recognizable to people. Do a really amazing job of matching people with the right coach. I think that's something where there's a lot of misfires in coaching, is in the right moment, the wrong coach, or vice versa. And then suddenly the whole coaching experience is looked at as poor. But it's just, well, if we just did a better job of matching, and then also eliminating some of the stuff that isn't coaching, right? Like these things that people reach out to a coach or create this interaction where, like, this could have been an email or.
Yeah. And what you said about executive coaching too, again, I think it's important at all levels, but it's interesting that that's like historically, again, where the focus has been is at the level of the organization that has the fewest people and is furthest away from your client.
Yep. Yeah.
So the use of technology, I think, is a game changer in terms of like allowing that to happen for your largest populations and those that are like, again, closest to serving your end user.
You mentioned, like, almost in passing a second ago about a year-end performance conversation. Is that the environment that you're operating in currently? Is it like, are they annual conversations, or are they more frequent, smaller conversations? Okay.
So what we would like to see is like monthly, like where there's like, we call them check-ins, like a check-in that would be, again, focused like on whatever those performance success measures that are set at the beginning of the year. Then there'd be like more of like, again, a formal check-in like on mid-year where you have like data sets that you're pulling forward from the first 6 months, and then like the year end with like the last 6 months and the year in its entirety. And then also inserting where there's very focused time outside of that on development and career growth conversations. And the way that we really look at development, or want people to look at development, is a lot of times people think that development or career growth, and I think you and I might have talked about this a little bit, is only based on where you're going. And so what we're really trying to help people navigate is like ensuring that development is making you your best self where you are. And then ideally, it's also where those skills or knowledge that make you better where you are also prepare you for where you're going. But there needs to be really intentional development, I would say minimally on a quarterly basis. That's probably realistically, especially since we're like more novice or like new in our journey with that. People will have the opportunity to like lean in and check in on those personal development goals as well.
Yeah, I'm happy to hear that, because I feel like you seem very proactive in your approach to learning, and this idea of this continuous learning.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if an organization is beholden to this annual performance review process, those things are at odds almost, right? That
it's handcuffs instead of handrails.
Right. So everything gets boiled down to this one conversation where the employee really is only focused on, am I getting a raise or not anyway? And so all the other stuff is just kind of flying by and it's not attached. And if you want to have continuous learning, there has to be continuous performance improvement
Yeah.
check-in so you can see if things are working or not. And like you said, be prepared, right? It's like no one should be surprised when they walk into a
Right.
performance conversation.
Yeah, I think that's like the problem. Like, again, like I always say, like any strength out of balance becomes a weakness. And that's kind of how I feel about a lot of like practices that have maybe been stood up is they like were launched with like great intent, but then it becomes out of balance. And then it becomes a weakness instead of something that really like equips and enables your organization to be successful. And so you're absolutely right. Like when you have it where like it's like this year-end conversation that happen, and then that becomes like the only conversation because all of these other like expectations, frequency, cadences haven't been established. And you do have employees then coming to those being surprised or spending a year like not being developed. And that's again where this should be a good thing. It should be an opportunity to celebrate success, and nobody should be surprised. But too frequently, because all of those other practices aren't in place or aren't prioritized, it creates again a defining moment of engagement that goes south for the employee.
Another thing you mentioned, I wanted to dig in a little on because it's important to me, and I love seeing it in some of the other companies I've talked to. When we talk about career pathing, career growth, development, and this sort of, all these things, when you talk about them in your mind, typically you have this upward and onward thought process. You're thinking, okay, this is, up and to the right, everything. And we've found that then what you're doing is you're leaving this open space, you're a blind spot. You're forgetting about people who are doing really, really well at what they're doing and want to continue doing really, really well at what they're doing. And so they get either, at best sort of ignored and left behind, and at worst, demotivated because they feel like, what's wrong with me? Why, you've seen it, the stories. It happens all the time. Like, oh, you're really good at this, so we're going to make you a manager.
Oh yeah.
But and so now they're not doing the thing that they're good at, and you're making them do something that they might not have an affinity for or any skills for, and then you're going to try to jam a bunch of leadership training on them to
Mhm.
make it work, and then nobody's winning. And so, is there anything that because it sounds like you're very thoughtful of this growth for what it means for the individual, right? Is there anything that you do intentionally? Is there any thoughts or things that you put into place to make sure that you're covering that?
Yeah, I can speak to a couple things. So I think, and again, I say this a lot. I think we do a real disservice to individuals, but we also do a disservice to the organizations that we're in when we only look at growth as a vertical trajectory. And usually that vertical trajectory, by the way, only means leadership, right? It
Right.
means that you have to go into some kind of like leadership pathway. And I found in my own career and in those who I surrounded myself with that the people who are most successful, their mindset about growth and development is that they looked at their careers like lattices instead of
Mm-hmm.
ladders. And so, with that comes a completely different mindset. I know I've taken times in my career where people were like, "Why do you do that? It seems like you're going backwards." And I'm like, that's really short-sighted, right? So like we do want to help people look at their career like it's a lattice instead of a ladder. And by having that as a cultural value with the organization, it does do a couple things. Like the first thing is it doesn't isolate individuals that aren't interested in leadership or interested in title, maybe being like the only thing that they're intrinsically motivated by. So we've been doing a lot of work on that just in terms of like moments that we can do for messaging, right, in different forums. The other thing I think about besides like the idea that your career should be a lattice instead of a ladder, and we're getting ready to actually make this available to leaders, is really having people understand their skills, values, and interests. And like, looking at like skills is like, of course, like the things you've done, your background, your experience, your education. Your interests are the things that make your eyes get wide or your ears
Mm-hmm.
perk up, right? And you're like, oh, like that makes me want to wake up in the morning and do the cha-cha slide. And then values, too infrequently, we don't talk about values and how that connection to the work that you do or the job that you're in or the organization, that's where they make or break you,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so I think that enabling leaders and frankly, enabling individuals to really have something that allows them to have self-awareness and inventory those things will help people career path and like look at growth in a different manner, because now you look at everything as an opportunity to like build a skill, take a skill, fill your cup, connect to your value system. instead of looking at like the only way that I can make that happen is by like this vertical trajectory and being a people leader. So I think there's other ways too that learning can assist with that. So one of the other things that we're doing is I'd like to do some like t-shirt size career development. And so I think as I've been going through with my new team, their own skills, values, and interests inventories, one of the things that was really interesting is that people were having a really hard time distinguishing between skill and interest, right? And getting it kind of like mixed up, thinking because I'm interested in something, it means I have like the background or skill. And so we're able to stand up like an opportunity while I was going through transformation to allow people to do like some like gig work. And it's like small bite-sized pieces, because I can't tell you how many times I've had individuals who are like, all I want to do is be in learning. I want to be a facilitator, you know, like, and then they get that job and they're like, this is not what I thought it was going to be. Because sometimes when you only get to see like, you know, the sexy pieces of the job, you think, again, your interest, your eyes get wide and your ears perk up and you think, oh, that's going to be exciting. And then you get into the role and you're like, this is not a match with my values. And I actually am not interested. I'm interested in what I thought it was. And so allowing people really in like bite-sized chunks to get visibility to the work that, again, they're like thinking I'm skilled in, but it really was interest. And I had multiple team members come back to me and be like, no. Employee engagement and belonging was a good example, because everybody's like, you know, I want to be that. And what they really thought in their mind was that it was just being a culture ambassador.
Right.
But then as they started to get like bite-sized pieces of the work, they're like, oh, there's a lot of like project management with this. And that makes me feel like I'm just behind a desk. And I thought it was going to be, you know, being a rah-rah sis boomba, like individual. And so I think that like, you know, we have an obligation to make sure that if people are looking at things, giving them little bite-sized pieces that allow them to actually experience work that's like, it's quick. It doesn't require a lot of onboarding, but some of the stuff that's like, again, not everyone's favorite because it's easier to do, but like that lets you get a taste of it. The other thing that we're kicking on for individuals who have maybe had a little bit of a taste and are like, you know what, I really like think this is for me, we'll be launching an immersive 6-month rotational program where they'll leave like their day job, so to speak, and go and be fully immersed. And then as part of that, they'll have kickoff, they'll wrap with a capstone. And then every month they'll have like additional development provided to them that, again, whether it's leadership, whether it's any space. So things like, you know, time management, delegation, agent of change, like those kinds of things that apply universally, again, so that your only pathway isn't just to be a leader.
Wow. That's bold and very progressive. The idea of being, you know, giving people that opportunity. I think a lot of L&D leaders are fearful of how do we ask the business for something like that? How do we allow someone to do something like that? And but I think, you know, you never know unless you ask and, you know, provide the reasoning that of why that's important and effective. So that's impressive.
I'm going to get a tip on that super quick. Like one of the things that we did is that because it's only like, again, 6 months, you obviously can't like take resources from all the same place. It has to come from multiple places. But the reality is that a lot of teams have like seasonality. And so what this does allow us to do is not only allows us to give people the opportunity and to build a warm bench, but it also we're not like adding incremental headcount. You can monetize that for the business, because if you have it always on and you're committed to it, that means that you're also like, you know, not taking on incremental headcount that might be at risk if there's like, you know, seasonality or market changes, but you're also like providing this fantastic opportunity for individuals, and you know, therefore also we hope we'll measure it increasing your tenure and then also decreasing your attrition. So there's business case to be made for it. It's not just the right thing to do, it's a smart business.
Yeah. No, I love it. I mean, and that's the thing. Many people wouldn't know what it is that they want to do, are good at, without that opportunity, you know, presented to them. I want you to do me a favor and try to think even further ahead. This is your 6 months in, give or take, right? If we get back together in a year, what's something that you would hopefully like love to be able to tell me happened over the next 12 months?
I would love to be able to tell you a couple of things. I'd like to say that we, in addition to some of the things I just shared about career development, I would also like to say that we've solved for, in some of at least our largest frontline teams, opportunities for development and growth that don't require you to go to a different functional area or leadership. So like growing where you are. So like really kind of thinking about like, you don't always have to have a different title either, right? And we want people that want to stay in the same place. So really thinking about how can we incentivize individuals to even stay as, a service agent or a sales rep, but still find ways where growth is happening. So they're finding intrinsic motivation and development, and then also finding some way that works to reward them for that in terms of the additional skill and the tenure that they're bringing to the table. And then the other thing would be just that I would say, solved the leadership. We're kind of chipping away right now on a competency level, but I'd like to more holistically say that we've solved for that. And for, new leader, our existing leader, and then those that aspire to be leaders and have that as part of their pathing.
Wow. No, fantastic. And so I hope that I hear that a year from
Me
now
too.
for you and for your organization. I think those are great things. Well, I really appreciate you sharing, especially, the perspective of this, the sort of, like we said, ground floor position that you're in, and the ability to sort of, put all these things in place. I think it hopefully can be inspiring to people, because you can do this kind of stuff. You're not 6 months in, even if you're 6 years in.
Yeah.
This is the kind of stuff that you can and should be doing. And there's plenty of backup research, your own results in the organization to back up all of these things to bring to the table to say, this is why we should do these, right? So
yeah.
So Katie, I really appreciate you sharing your insights and your experience. And I do hope that we can check in with you again in a year and see how things are going.
That sounds great. It was a pleasure meeting with you today.
Thanks for listening to this episode of They Learn, You Win, presented by Skooks. If you enjoyed this episode, please follow or subscribe in your podcast player. And follow me, David Wentworth, on LinkedIn. I try to distill what works and what doesn't for L&D leaders so you can stay up to speed on the latest insights, ideas, and tech. See you next time.